The arena for the first challenge of the Gauntlet was a vast, cavernous space that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. Kaleb and Averie stood with the other contestants on a raised platform, their hearts racing as they tried to take in the scene before them. The floor of the arena was a complex maze of obstacles, pitfalls, and what looked like death traps. Pools of bubbling liquid that Kaleb suspected wasn't water dotted the landscape. Mechanical constructs whirred and clanked, their purpose unclear but undoubtedly dangerous. In the distance, barely visible through the haze that filled the air, loomed a tower that seemed to be the goal of this nightmarish obstacle course. "Contestants," the now familiar voice of the Gauntlet's overseer boomed through hidden speakers. "Your first challenge is simple in concept, but treacherous in execution. Reach the central tower. The first 8 to arrive will move on to the next round. The rest, well, let's just say your journey ends here." A murmur of fear and desperation rippled through the gathered contestants. Kaleb felt Averie's hand tighten in his, and he gave it a reassuring squeeze. "Remember," he whispered to her, "we stick together, no matter what." Averie nodded, her eyes already scanning the arena, her brilliant mind no doubt formulating strategies. A klaxon sounded startlingly loud in the tense silence, and chaos erupted. Contestants surged forward, some diving recklessly into the maze of obstacles, others hesitating at the edge of the platform. Kaleb and Averie held back for a moment, watching as the first wave of contestants encountered the arena's dangers. One man, sprinting ahead of the pack, suddenly disappeared with a scream, swallowed by a pit that had opened beneath his feet. Another contestant leaped what seemed to be a simple gap, only to be caught mid-air by some invisible force and flung violently aside. "This isn't just about speed," Averie murmured, her eyes narrowed in concentration. "Look at the pattern of the obstacles. There's a logic to it, a sequence." Kaleb nodded, trusting his sister's assessment. "So we take it slow. Figure out the pattern?" "Not too slow," Averie replied, a hint of her usual determination creeping into her voice. "But smart. Come on." They set off, moving with caution but purpose. Kaleb took the lead, his physical strength and agility put to the test as they navigated the treacherous terrain. Averie followed close behind, her keen eyes spotting patterns and potential dangers that Kaleb might have missed. Their progress was steady, if not spectacular. They watched as other contestants rushed ahead, some making impressive headway, others falling victim to the arena's many traps. The air was filled with the sounds of machinery, screams of pain and fear, and the constant nerve-wracking announcements updating them on the progress of the leaders. As they approached what appeared to be a field of swaying mechanical arms, each ending in a wicked-looking blade, Averie tugged on Kaleb's sleeve. "Wait," she said, her eyes fixed on the deadly forest before them. "There's a rhythm to it. See how they move? It's like a dance." Kaleb watched, and slowly he began to see what Averie had noticed. The arms moved in a complex but repeating pattern. If they timed it right. "Okay," he said, taking a deep breath. "You call it. Tell me when to move." What followed was a heart-stopping game of timing and trust. Averie's voice guided Kaleb through the maze of slashing blades, her calculations proving eerily accurate. When they emerged on the other side, unscathed, Kaleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. "Nice work, sis," he said, grinning despite the danger they were still in. Averie managed a small smile in return, but her eyes were already focused on the next challenge ahead. As they progressed deeper into the arena, the obstacles became increasingly complex and dangerous. They crossed bridges that disappeared beneath their feet, navigated rooms where gravity seemed to shift at random, and dodged bursts of flame that erupted from hidden vents. Throughout it all, Kaleb and Averie worked in perfect synchronization. Kaleb's physical prowess and quick reflexes complemented Averie's analytical mind and problem-solving skills. They moved as one, overcoming each challenge with a combination of caution and daring that seemed to confound the arena's designers. They weren't the fastest, but their steady progress and teamwork kept them firmly in the middle of the pack. As they cleared yet another obstacle, a holographic display flickered to life nearby, showing the current standings. "Look," Averie said, pointing to their names on the list. "We're in 6th place. We might actually make it." Kaleb allowed himself a moment of hope, but he knew better than to let his guard down. "Let's not celebrate yet. We've still got a ways to go." As if to underscore his words, a scream echoed from somewhere behind them, followed by the ominous announcement that another contestant had been eliminated. They pressed on, the central tower looming ever closer. But as they entered what appeared to be the final stretch, they encountered a new kind of obstacle: other contestants. A group of 3, led by a burly man Kaleb recognized from the upper sectors, had formed a blockade. They were picking off other contestants as they approached, clearly determined to secure their own passage to the next round by any means necessary. "We can't go back," Averie whispered, eyeing the group warily, "and there's no way around." Kaleb nodded grimly. "Then we go through. Stay close to me." They approached the group, tension building with every step. The leader, a man with a cruel glint in his eye, stepped forward. "Well, well," he sneered. "Look what we have here. A couple of Sector 7 rats. Turn back now, and maybe we'll let you live a little longer." Kaleb felt Averie tense beside him, but he kept his voice calm as he replied. "We don't want any trouble. There's room for all of us to qualify. Just let us pass." The man laughed, a harsh sound devoid of humor. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't about qualifying. This is about eliminating the competition, permanently." He lunged forward suddenly, a makeshift weapon gleaming in his hand. But Kaleb was ready. Years of navigating the dangerous streets of Sector 7 had honed his reflexes to a razor's edge. He dodged the attack, using the man's momentum against him. In one fluid motion, he disarmed the attacker and sent him stumbling into his own companions. "Now, Averie," Kaleb shouted, and they broke into a run. They sprinted past the disoriented group, hearts pounding as they heard shouts of anger and the sound of pursuit behind them. But their teamwork and Averie's quick thinking had given them the edge they needed. As they approached the base of the central tower, they could see other contestants converging from different directions. It was going to be close. "Come on!" Kaleb urged, pushing his tired muscles to their limit. With a final burst of speed, they crossed the threshold of the tower just as the announcement rang out. 6th and 7th qualifiers confirmed. 1 spot remains. They had made it. Against all odds, Kaleb and Averie had survived the first challenge of the Gauntlet. As they stood in the tower's antechamber, catching their breath and hardly daring to believe they had succeeded, Kaleb pulled Averie into a tight hug. "We did it, Ave," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We actually did it." Averie hugged him back fiercely. "Together," she said, "just like always." But as they waited for the final qualifier to be determined, both siblings knew that this was just the beginning. They had survived the first challenge, but the Gauntlet was far from over. And somewhere in this massive, deadly arena lay secrets about New Providence and the world beyond. Secrets that Kaleb and Averie were now more determined than ever to uncover. As the final contestant stumbled into the tower and the ominous announcement of the challenge's end echoed through the arena, Kaleb and Averie exchanged a look of grim determination. They had taken their first steps into the heart of New Providence's darkest institution. Now they would have to dig deeper, push harder, and risk everything if they hoped to survive the Gauntlet and expose the truth that lay hidden within its deadly games. The first challenge was over, but their real test was just beginning. The survivors of the first challenge were ushered into a stark, windowless room that would serve as their living quarters for the duration of the Gauntlet. The space was utilitarian, with basic sleeping pods lining the walls and a central area for meals and strategizing. As Kaleb and Averie entered, they quickly took stock of their fellow contestants. 8 had made it through, including themselves. Besides the siblings, there was Mara, the ex-military woman they had briefly encountered earlier; Jace, the burly man who had tried to stop them at the tower; Zara, a lithe woman with keen eyes that reminded Kaleb of a predator; Dr. Emilia Reeves, an older woman who seemed out of place in this brutal competition; Kai, the young man with dyed hair and a perpetual smirk; and finally Marcus, a middle-aged man with the weathered look of someone from the agricultural sectors. As they all settled in, the tension in the room was palpable. These people were now both potential allies and future opponents. Kaleb could see the calculations happening behind everyone's eyes. trying to determine who might be useful and who was a threat. Averie leaned in close to whisper to Kaleb, "We need to be careful. Alliances might help us survive, but we can't forget why we're really here." Kaleb nodded, understanding her meaning. Their goal wasn't just to survive the Gauntlet, but to uncover the truth about New Providence and potentially find a way to communicate with the outside world. It was a delicate balance they would need to maintain. The silence was broken by Mara, who stepped into the center of the room. "All right, let's get one thing straight," she said, her voice carrying the authority of someone used to command. "We may all be competing against each other in the end, but for now we have a better chance of surviving if we work together." Jay scoffed from his corner. "Speak for yourself, soldier girl. I work alone." "That attitude might get you killed," Zara chimed in, her voice cool and calculated. "The Gauntlet isn't just about individual strength. It's about adapting, using every resource available, including each other." As the discussion continued, evolving into a debate about the merits of cooperation versus competition, Kaleb and Averie listened intently. They were learning valuable information about their fellow contestants, their backgrounds, their strengths, and their potential weaknesses. Dr. Reeves, who had been quiet until now, suddenly spoke up. "I believe I might have some insight that could benefit us all." All eyes turned to her as she continued. "I was a researcher in the upper sectors before I asked too many questions. I've studied previous gauntlets. There are patterns to the challenges, if you know how to look for them." This piqued everyone's interest, even the reluctant Jace. As Dr. Reeves began to share her knowledge, Kaleb noticed Kai watching the proceedings with an amused expression, as if he was enjoying a private joke. Over the next few hours, a tentative alliance began to form. Despite their differences, the contestants realized that pooling their knowledge and skills gave them a better chance of survival. Mara took on a leadership role, her military background proving useful in organizing their efforts. Zara and Kai formed a scouting team, their agility and cunning making them ideal for gathering information. Dr. Reeves and Averie quickly bonded over their shared intellect, diving deep into discussions about the Gauntlet's possible layouts and mechanisms. Kaleb found himself working closely with Marcus, whose practical skills and level-headedness complemented Kaleb's strength and determination. Only Jace remained somewhat apart, though even he began to grudgingly participate in group discussions. As they prepared for sleep before the next challenge, Kaleb pulled Averie aside. "What do you think?" he asked in a low voice. "Can we trust them?" Averie's brow furrowed in thought. "To a point," she replied carefully. "They all have their own agendas, but I think for now our goals align. We need to be cautious, though, especially around Kai and Zara. They're hiding something, I can feel it." Kaleb nodded, trusting his sister's instincts. "And what about Dr. Reeves? She seems to know an awful lot about the Gauntlet for someone who claims to have been in the upper sectors." "I know," Averie said, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "That's why I want to talk to her more. She might have information that could help us understand what's really going on here." Their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the room's speakers. "Contestants, prepare yourselves. The next challenge begins in 1 hour. Remember, only 6 will proceed to the next round." A tense silence fell over the room. The brief camaraderie they had built was instantly overshadowed by the reality of their situation. 2 of them would not survive the coming trial. As they began to prepare, checking their meager supplies and steeling themselves for whatever lay ahead, Kaleb couldn't shake a feeling of unease. They had made it through the first challenge, but he knew the Gauntlet was only going to get more difficult, more dangerous. He looked at Averie, saw the determination in her eyes, and felt a surge of pride and protectiveness. They had come this far together, defying the odds time and again. Whatever the Gauntlet threw at them next, they would face it as they always had, side by side, combining Kaleb's strength and instincts with Averie's brilliance and adaptability. As the hour ticked away, alliances were confirmed, last-minute strategies discussed, and silent promises made. When the door to their living quarters finally slid open, revealing a dark corridor that would lead them to their next trial, the 8 contestants moved as one. They stepped into the unknown, each harboring their own secrets, their own motivations, but united for now in their desire to survive. Kaleb and Averie exchanged one last look of understanding before focusing on the path ahead. The next phase of their journey through the Gauntlet was about to begin, and with it, the true test of their newfound alliances and the revelation of hidden enemies. The game had evolved, the stakes were higher, and the line between friend and foe had never been more blurred. As they ventured deeper into the heart of the Gauntlet, Kaleb and Averie knew that every step brought them closer to the truth about New Providence, but also closer to dangers beyond their imagination. The question was, would their alliances be strong enough to see them through, or would the brutal nature of the Gauntlet turn even the most trusted companion into a deadly enemy? Only time would tell, and in the Gauntlet, time was a luxury they could ill afford. The dark corridor seemed to stretch endlessly before them, the air thick with tension and the faint hum of hidden machinery. Kaleb and Averie moved cautiously, staying close to each other while remaining aware of their fellow contestants. The alliance they had formed in their living quarters was already being tested by the oppressive atmosphere of the unknown challenge that lay ahead. Suddenly, the corridor opened up into a vast chamber, and collective gasps echoed as the contestants took in their surroundings. They found themselves on a narrow platform overlooking a massive underground cavern. Far below, they could see a maze of twisting passageways, treacherous ledges, and what appeared to be underground rivers of some glowing, possibly toxic substance. The voice of the Gauntlet's overseer boomed through hidden speakers. "Welcome to the depths, contestants. Your challenge is simple. Navigate to the central platform." A holographic marker flickered to life, indicating a structure in the distance that seemed to float above the cavern floor. But be warned, the environment is hostile and ever-changing. Oh, and do mind the local wildlife. They're rather hungry. As if on cue, inhuman screeches echoed from the depths, sending shivers down everyone's spines. 6 of you will reach the central platform and move on to the next round, the voice continued. The other 2? Well, the depths will claim them. Your challenge begins now. For a moment, no one moved, each contestant assessing the daunting task before them. Then, without warning, Jace shoved past the others and leaped onto a nearby ledge, beginning his descent. "Every man for himself," he shouted back, a manic grin on his face. His actions broke the spell of inaction. Zara and Kai exchanged a quick glance before darting off in another direction, their movements fluid and coordinated. The others began to move as well, the tenuous alliance already starting to fracture under the pressure of survival. Kaleb grabbed Averie's hand. "Stay close," he said, his eyes scanning for the safest path down. "We do this together." Averie nodded, her mind already racing to analyze the cavern's layout. "Look," she pointed. "See how the toxic rivers flow? I think they're following underground currents. If we can map their pattern, we might be able to predict safe routes." They began their descent, Kaleb's strength and agility complemented by Averie's keen observations and quick thinking. As they navigated the treacherous terrain, they could hear the sounds of the other contestants. Shouts of triumph, cries of fear, and occasionally screams that were suddenly cut short. The challenges of the depths were numerous and deadly. Sections of the cavern would suddenly shift, opening new paths while closing others. Pockets of noxious gas would erupt without warning, forcing the siblings to hold their breath and scramble for safety. And always there was the threat of the local wildlife. Monstrous creatures adapted to the underground environment, with razor-sharp claws and an insatiable hunger. As they paused on a relatively stable ledge to catch their breath, Kaleb and Averie heard a commotion nearby. Peering around a rocky outcropping, they saw Dr. Reeves struggling to fend off one of the cave creatures. Without hesitation, Kaleb leaped into action using a piece of loose rubble to drive the beast away. "Thank you," Dr. Reeves gasped, clutching a nasty gash on her arm. "I thought I was done for." Averie quickly tore a strip from her jumpsuit to bandage the wound. "We need to keep moving," she said, eyeing the darkness warily. "That thing might come back with friends." As they helped Dr. Reeves to her feet, Kaleb made a quick decision. "Come with us," he offered. "We'll have a better chance together." Dr. Reeves hesitated for a moment before nodding gratefully. As they continued their journey, she began to share more of her knowledge about the Gauntlet's systems and designs, information that proved invaluable as they navigated the ever-changing landscape of the depths. Hours seemed to pass as they made their way through the cavern. The physical toll was immense, but it was the psychological strain that truly tested them. The constant danger, the eerie sounds echoing through the darkness, and the knowledge that at any moment the cavern itself might turn against them. It all wore on their nerves. They had several close calls. Once, a section of the path crumbled beneath their feet, and only Kaleb's quick reflexes saved Averie from plummeting into the toxic river below. Another time, they found themselves cornered by a pack of the cave creatures, and it was Averie's clever use of the unstable environment that allowed them to escape. As they neared what they hoped was the final stretch to the central platform, they encountered Marcus, the man from the agricultural sectors. He was trapped on a small island of rock, surrounded by the glowing toxic substance. "Help!" he called out, his voice strained with fear and exhaustion. "The bridge collapsed. I can't get across." Kaleb and Averie exchanged a look. Helping Marcus would slow them down, potentially putting their own survival at risk. But leaving him felt wrong, a betrayal of the values they had clung to even in the harsh reality of Sector 7. "We have to try," Averie said softly, and Kaleb nodded in agreement. What followed was a tense operation. Using scavenged materials and Averie's engineering know-how, they constructed a makeshift bridge. Kaleb, being the strongest, anchored one end while Dr. Reeves and Averie guided Marcus across. The entire time they could hear the sounds of other contestants getting closer, and the ominous rumble of the cavern shifting around them. Just as Marcus reached safety, the platform he had been stranded on collapsed entirely, sinking into the toxic river with a hiss of dissolving rock. The group stood there for a moment, catching their breath and realizing how close they had come to losing one of their own. "Thank you," Marcus said, his voice thick with emotion. "I won't forget this." As they continued towards the central platform, now a group of 4, Kaleb couldn't help but reflect on the nature of the Gauntlet. It was designed to pit them against each other, to bring out the worst in humanity in the name of survival. But in choosing to help others and holding on to their compassion even in the face of mortal danger, weren't they proving that there was another way? These thoughts were interrupted as they finally caught sight of their goal. The central platform loomed before them, a structure of metal and pulsing energy floating above the cavern floor. But between them and safety lay one final obstacle, a chasm too wide to jump with no obvious way across. As they stood there trying to devise a solution, they heard movement behind them. Turning, they saw Mara, Zara, and Kai approaching from different directions. The remaining contestants had converged on this final challenge. For a tense moment, no one moved. They were all exhausted, pushed to their limits by the depths. One more burst of energy, one final challenge, and then blessed rest. But only for 6 of them. Averie was the one to break the silence. "Look," she said, pointing to a series of metal rings embedded in the cavern ceiling. I think we're supposed to swing across." Kaleb saw immediately what she meant. The rings were positioned in such a way that, with the right timing and momentum, one could theoretically swing from one to the next, crossing the chasm to reach the platform. "It's the only way," Mara agreed, her military training evident in her quick assessment of the situation. What followed was a series of heart-stopping moments as, one by one, the contestants made the perilous journey across the chasm. Kaleb insisted on going first, using his strength to test the rings and establish the best rhythm for swinging across. Averie went next, her lighter frame allowing for quicker, more agile movements. As Dr. Reeves prepared to make the crossing, a rumble shook the cavern. Pieces of the ceiling began to fall, splashing into the toxic river below and sending up clouds of noxious fumes. "The cavern's collapsing!" Marcus shouted. "We need to move now!" In a frenzy of activity, the remaining contestants began their attempts to cross. Mara made it look easy, her trained physique carrying her smoothly from ring to ring. Zara and Kai worked together, their teamwork evident as they coordinated their swings to avoid collisions. Marcus struggled, his fear of heights nearly paralyzing him. but encouragement from the others gave him the strength to push through. Dr. Reeves, despite her injury, managed to grit her teeth and make the crossing. As the last contestant reached the platform, a massive tremor shook the entire cavern. Huge chunks of rock began to fall, and the toxic river below started to rise, eating away at the lower levels of the cavern. "Run!" Kaleb shouted, and as one, the group sprinted towards the center of the platform. They reached the glowing energy field at the platform's heart, just as the world seemed to collapse around them. There was a sensation of movement, of rising. And then suddenly, blessedly, silence. As their vision cleared, they found themselves back in the sterile environment of the Gauntlet's inner chambers. All 8 contestants had survived the depths. The voice of the Overseer crackled to life. "Congratulations, survivors. You've all shown exceptional skill and determination. As a reward, you will all proceed to the next round. But be warned, the challenges only get harder from here." As the adrenaline of their ordeal began to fade, replaced by bone-deep exhaustion, Kaleb pulled Averie into a tight hug. They had survived another test, had even managed to help others along the way, but both siblings knew that this was just another step in their journey. The Gauntlet was testing more than just their physical abilities. It was testing their humanity, their values, their very souls. As they were led back to their living quarters to rest and prepare for the next challenge, Kaleb and Averie exchanged a look of grim determination. They would continue to survive, continue to uncover the truth about New Providence and the world beyond. But they would do it their way, together, and without losing the compassion and integrity that defined them. The game was evolving, becoming more complex and dangerous with each passing hour. But so were they. And in that evolution lay their hope for survival, for answers, and for a future beyond the cruel machinations of the Gauntlet.